So there is part 2 of Pinia migration walkthrough, and in this part we are going to migrate our components and finish the migration. So at this stage, I expect that you've already completed your store migration. So that means all your Vuex stores are now have their Pinia counterparts that you've migrated using our guide. So before we start with part 2, please go through our official documentation on Pinia. That should include all the information you need about migration. Especially pay attention to the migrating from Vuex section, so it tells you how the migration should work. And this might change over time to give you more details about the migration, but so far it should have everything you need. So just by looking at our multi-step migration, which we are doing, we are now at the stage with refactoring components. So I think I didn't show you how to sync stores before. So let's start with that. So let's say you have your Pinia store migrated already. And now we would like to start syncing it with your Vuex store. So what you do is you import your existing Vuex store and define this config, which basically takes a store and you tell it which store properties it should use. So for example, let's look at the node store. As you can see, it has 5 different modules, right? And they can be namespace, they can be not namespaced. But if a store has a name, like a module name, you must reference it using the name property. And I'll try show you another example with that. Let's see. So we have also the div store. Let's get to that. Not this one. Yeah, this one. So as you can see, the divs are namespaced, and you can tell if it's namespaced or not by going to the module itself. So for example, for the nodes, you can see it says state, actions, getters, and mutations, nothing else. And if you go to the divs, it says namespace true. That's how you know it's actually namespaced. So you have to explicitly tell this configuration to use a namespace module, otherwise it will not work. And why do we need to do the synchronization step? That allows us to migrate our components one by one without migrating the whole thing. In order to do that, we must ensure that our components are using the same state, right? If we were to migrate one component to Pinia and others are left with Vuex, they won't have the same state. And to solve that problem, we have the synchronization plugin. It's enabled by default if you import Pinia instance, and you import Pinia instance by going to Pinia instance. You see it's used in multiple places already. So this is our common Pinia instance that should be used in all Pinia powered applications. And that allows you to use any of the stores without dealing with multiple Pinia instances. This instance is actually already using the synchronization plugin, and it's using the global accessor plugin that I've showed you in the previous video that allows you to use the parts of other stores without explicitly importing them to avoid the circle references issue. So that's how you import your Pinia. You synchronize your stores. I suggest that you do this step separately from other steps. So you add the synchronization step, you create an MR and verify that all your feature specs are working, all your unit tests are passing. Then you can continue with the rest. So once we've done that, we can go and actually migrate our components. And migrating components is straightforward. You replace your Vuex imports with Pinia. Since Pinia doesn't have map getters, you should use map state. Then you import your new Pinia store and use it instead of Vuex. So let's go to our previous getters. It was previously using Vuex. So now we just replace it with map state, use our store, and we should be good. There are cases where, for example, Vuex might have defined getters and state with the same name as for this example, right? So we have discussions defined as getters and also as state. This is not possible in Pinia. And what you should do is you should create a new getter with a different name, as I've done here. So previously the getter was called discussions, now it's called virtual discussions. And Pinia allows us to map this getter to a different name, so we don't have to change the components code at all. And then you do the same step for your actions. So it was map actions from Vuex, now it's map actions from Pinia, and you also provide the store here. And that's basically all what you have to do in your Vue components. The bulk of the work comes in the specs. And specs are written differently from what you've accustomed to do in Vuex. So usually when you see a component with Vuex, the whole Vuex store is mocked. So it's not actually importing a store properly. And it's testing against the mocked store, which can produce false positives or false negatives, which is not a good way to test the store. So when we test our component with Pinia, we always import the real store. And in our example, it imports multiple stores. So for example, it imports use nodes, use legacy divs, and use batch comments. So these are real stores. These are not mocks. And you should always do that. Always test, again, real stores. And we have to do some workarounds for Vue-free, unfortunately. Otherwise, your test will not work. So the first thing you do is you say Vue use Pinia Vue plugin. And Pinia Vue plugin is imported from Pinia. And that is required for Vue-free compatibility. Otherwise, the test will not find Pinia. The next thing you do is you initialize your stores before all the tests. So in the before each block, you must call this function. So you say use legacy divs, use nodes, use batch comments. Okay, of course, you replace it with your stores. That creates, that basically populates Pinia instance with your stores. And once the component is mounted, it knows that it has to look up for this store. If you don't do this, Vue will try to use Pinia for Vue-free, and it will just won't work. So that's the second step. Then you have to define your Pinia explicitly. So official documentation suggests you should call create testing Pinia, which is also we should also do that. But then you have to do some additional thing here is to assign it to a variable that you then provide to your component. So each time a new test is created, you should create a new testing Pinia and then explicitly pass it to a component. So in this case, it's a mount function. In shallow mount, it's exactly the same. You pass it as similar to what we did with Vuex. So before that, you probably passed your store, and now you replaced it with just Pinia, right? For mount components, it will be more complex to do because you will have to pass store and Pinia as well because mount renders all the components. So you cannot remove Vuex just now. You have to test against both Vuex and Pinia in this instance. And we have to provide Pinia because it will also fail to find your correct Pinia instance. Like when you call create testing Pinia, usually it assigns a new active Pinia and Vue should look it up automatically. Unfortunately, with Vue compat, it doesn't work. So we explicitly tell Vue to use our custom testing Pinia instance. And then your migration part looks like this. You go through all the store calls. So usually it's store dispatch, store commit, or maybe store state and manual store manipulation, and replace it with Pinia calls. So in our case, we know that all these sections were coming from the node store. So we replace it with proper Pinia calls, and that should work automatically. Another important thing here is that if you are using actual Vuex store, which is a really rare case, but if you do, don't forget to reset the store in each block, because otherwise all the state you commit will be the same in every test. So if you've patched the store state in the first test, it will stay in the second test, and that means you are not having clean state. And Vuex doesn't provide a reset function out of the box. So what I did, I created a reset commit mutation, and you have to do the same for your store. Let's see if I can look it up. Yeah, that's how it looks like. So I just grab the create state function that was used to create the store in the first place. Let's look at it. That's how our Vuex store was created, right? It used this function to then call it inside the nodes module. So here is our state. We use exactly the same function to reset our state. So we basically assign the create state fresh state to our existing state. And that's all what you have to do. All right. So for all the cases when you are using synchronization with Vuex store, don't forget to include this plugin. So it's not included in the create testing Pinia by default. So I have to explicitly import this. If you are using try store helper function, don't forget to import global accessor plugin. It's also required. And then we go through our specs one by one and check where the store is used. So for example, here we used commit mutation. We replace it with a Pinia alternative. Right, and the spec should just work. The problem occurs when you have a spec that was incorrect in the first place. So, for example, if you have a fake Vuex store, you create a fake state, you create a fake dispatch calls. They are not testing against real store, and store might behave completely differently. In that case, your spec will not pass if you use Pinia, and you have to fix the spec first. For example, in this case, it was just completely replacing the dispatch call that was executed at some point, and this didn't happen in the real application, unfortunately. So, for example, the component that we use here, it was expecting a discussion to be present in the state, but it wasn't there because the state was fake. So we have to fix this by calling the mutation on the store itself, adding this state so the component works, and it should work. But there's another catch here with Pinia. You probably will not encounter this, but in the case you will, I will show you how to deal with that. So sometimes when you run your pending timers, active Pinia might change, and that can depend on a lot of factors. So if you see that, for example, if you clearly know that your action was called, but the expect is saying it wasn't, I would suggest you, first of all, you go to that action and you put a breakpoint here, and then you put a breakpoint before you actually performed an action, and inspect this just to verify that the action was called before this expect, right? So we can see we arrived at the dispatch event. Let's put another breakpoint here. then we clearly see we did call the action in the store, and then we arrive at the expect. So the store is correct. We trigger the action, we actually go to the action itself, and the expectation is triggered afterwards. So if you have that and you still see your spec failing, probably your Pinia instance is not correct. So you have to do this. You have to store your active Pinia. And once you perform the action, you have to restore it by calling set active Pinia and provide the Pinia instance. That will ensure that once you call use store and put your action name here, that it uses correct Pinia. If you try to do this, like use store and provide active Pinia here, it also will not work. Okay, the rest is kind of straightforward. You just replace all the existing Vuex calls with actual Pinia calls, right? And it should just work. In my case, I'm not using Vuex anymore, so I can remove it. If you are using mount tests, you probably should keep it unless you've migrated everything. Yeah, and this is pretty straightforward. Just double checking that I didn't miss anything here. Yeah, usually your Vuex store will define some fake state. As I've mentioned, you have to recreate it properly now, so you have to properly call mutations, or you can say use nodes and you push some state directly to the store like this, right? This will also work. I prefer mutations because it allows us to stay closer to how the store works, because usually you change your state with mutations. If you just change some state with explicit calls, it might not correspond to what your store actually can do. So I prefer using mutations. And in our case, batch comments is also synchronizing with existing Vuex store. So you can see, right? And because it's doing that, that means the old Vuex store will be synchronized back to the Pinia store each time we call a new test. So we have to reset it. Otherwise, this old state will persist in the Pinia store as well. That's how we ensure consistency across all the tests. Yeah, and the rest is, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Let's double check that we didn't forget anything. Yeah, I think we should be good. And let's see if the specs are passing now. Yeah. So that's how you migrate your Vue components. You can migrate it one by one. But if you feel like your changes are tiny, you can do a batch of comments in a single MR, batch of components. And it all depends on the div. So usually I will grab a div and see how many things are changed. So in my case, it's like 50 insertions, 50 deletions. So probably I could pack in more 2-3 components here. So it's like 100 or 200 lines. Usually when it reaches 300 lines, I try to stop because it gets really complex to review. But the hard limit is like 500 lines. 500 lines means you have to stop. Okay, and after you've done with all that migrations, that means you've migrated to Pinia completely, and you can start remove your legacy code. So you will go to your existing Pinia stores, remove this configuration, remove all the imports to that store. You go to the places where you create your components. So for example, let's see how it goes for our case. So we have this store used in this function. I would have to replace this with Pinia. So Pinia will be used here as well. Then I remove this import and basically remove it everywhere it's used. So we are not calling Vuex anymore. And then we can conclude our migration and say we've migrated to Pinia. So that's all, and have a happy migration.